right, good afternoon and welcome to everyone in the room and online. So delighted to welcome you to Oregon Law. My name is Marcilynn Burke, and I'm the Dean of the University of Oregon School of Law and the Dave Meyer Chair in Leadership in Law. And I'm also standing here before you because I'm the co-chair of the board of the Wayne Morse Center for Law and Politics. So it's with all those hats that I welcome you, the members of the bench and the bar, friends, family, admirers of David Schuman, and of course the UO Law community. We are all great admirers of David Schuman, and we are delighted to have you with us today. Professor Emeritus David Schuman left a lasting legacy at the University of Oregon School of Law as a scholar, an award-winning professor, a mentor, and an integral volunteer at the Wayne Morse Center, and of course, a cherished colleague. He had an outsized impact on Oregon jurisprudence as a judge and a deputy attorney general, and of course, he influenced the broader community through his writing, which a number of you here have made possible through this new book, A Voice for Justice, Writings of David Schuman. Today, we celebrate the publication of that book, from which David's wife Sharon will later give us a reading. So I thank all of you who gave of your time and your treasure to make this possible. Many of you present also played an important role in carrying forward David's legacy at the law school by supporting the launch of the David Schuman Legal Justice Fellowship at the Wayne Morse Center. What a fitting and generous way to honor his life and his contributions. We are pleased today to have recipients of that award with us. The inaugural Schuman Fellow, Mandy Dorman, will share her fellowship experience with us later. So again, I say welcome to all of you. We're so excited to be gathering together for this purpose. And I now invite to the podium former UO Law Dean Margie, who will be moderating this event for us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Burke. And I'd like to add an additional welcome from Margaret Hallett, the former director of the Wayne Morse Center for Law and Politics. I know most of you, if not all of you, know her, and she couldn't be with us today. So welcome from Margaret. The book, which I brought up to the podium here and will be available to you after the program, highlights Judge Schuman's fiction, essays, legal scholarship, and of course, judicial opinions. And it encapsulates and celebrates his life and career. But I want to take a moment to recognize somebody who would want to recognize her, because this book is also a tribute to Sharon Schuman. Sharon was, of course, David's indispensable life partner and intellectual partner for over 50 years. And she is, as you know, an indomitable woman herself, a highly respected teacher, scholar, writer, and humanitarian. And you know, her determination after David's death to bring this book to life was simply incredible. And so we have her to thank for that. And that determination was directed not just to the book, as Dean Burke has told us, but also to its twin, which is the David Schuman Legal Justice Fellowship, which we're celebrating today. We're going to begin our program, as Dean Burke told you, with having Sharon come up to the microphone. She's going to read us a short excerpt from the book, and then I will introduce this wonderful panel of legal colleagues who will share their perspective on David's legacy. And then finally, we'll hear from Rebecca Dinwoody, first of all, the co-director of Wayne Morse Center, about a little bit more detail about the fellowship, and of course from Mandy, our inaugural holder of the fellowship. So without further ado, Sharon.
Thank everybody for being here today, and all the people on Zoom, relatives, friends, colleagues of David's. I want to thank the panelists who all helped with the book and with the website that has a composite biography. You can really go to the website and read. And I'm going to read the shortest of the fiction that we included in the book. And it's a story that David wrote when he was probably 19 as an undergraduate at Stanford. It was published in the student literary magazine there. And, I do know him. Okay. Saturday night. Seated at his desk, Norman had been staring at a mimeographed page of numbers and graphs for more than a half hour. Finally, he took a clean sheet notebook paper from the drawer. Patient 1A's persistent pattern of avoidance, he wrote carefully, coupled with his refusal to place his token next to that of the experimenter, indicates that the patient manifests to an abnormal degree symptoms of intropunitive guilt and shallow affect. He skipped a line, printed 1B, neatly in the left margin, leaned back in his chair and lit a cigarette. There were 1s through 1M, and the families of 2 through 15 were equally large. At this rate, he thought, I should finish next Monday's assignment sometime in August, assuming I work straight through. He was calculating when he would finish if he were allowed 5 hours per day for eating and sleeping, when a quarter-inch ash fell into his lap and shattered his concentration. Norman was taking Professor Bernard's Measurement of Personality seminar. The subject matter of the course was mostly analysis of Professor Bernard's personality device, a 3-foot by 3-foot piece of plywood painted light green, upon which the patient and the tester each moved his token, a red plastic checker with black linear facial features. A second experimenter recorded the patient's moves and later classified them into such categories as intimate, hostile, or withdrawing. The page before Norman contained the records of 200 psychotic adolescents. His assignment was to write a 1-sentence personality sketch of each. From the given data, Norman could deduce exactly nothing about the patients. Intropunitive guilt and shallow affect were 2 of Professor Bernard's favorite psychopathologies. Norman therefore attributed them to 1A. Norman stood up and brushed the ash off his pants. There were 2 ashtrays in his 3-room apartment, and they were both overflowing. Norman emptied one into the wastebasket, and noticing how stale it smelled, carried it into the bathroom and held it under a stream of hot water. Slowly at first, then all at once, the caked-on carving gave way to reveal the plump face and blue plaid bonnet of a prepubescent farm girl. Surrounding her face was the inscription, "Everything's better with blue bonnet on it." Tastes just like the 70-cent spread. Looks like Barbara, thought Norman, as he dried the ashtray. Then he took it back to his desk and confronted patient 1. Now, Norman remembered that Professor Bernard also taught a graduate seminar, Psychoanalysis and Literature. Next to 1B, he wrote, patient 1B is Captain Ahab. Without consulting the data, he moved on to 1C. Patient 1C, he wrote, is either Shakespeare or Ben Jonson cleverly disguised as Shakespeare. He took a long pull on a cigarette and pressed it into the dimpled face of the bubonic girl. She doesn't really look like Barbara, he thought. Just the hair. He turned off the desk lamp and got up and stood looking out the window. It was dusk. I will call Barbara, he thought, and talk to her and laugh and see how she's been. I'll call her as soon as they turn on the street lights. Fun. Black boots and blonde hair, he thought, smiling. In a blue bonnet, on cobbled back streets. Beautiful Barbara, the barbaric, bewitching belle. The street lamps interrupted him. He sat by the telephone and dialed her number. 2 rings. Then, hello? Norman recognized Joan, Barbara's roommate. Hello, Joan. Barb there? Yeah, who's this? This, said Norman in his best ever Dickerson voice, is the ghost of Christmas past. He heard the receiver being set down and muffled voices in the background, and after a few seconds, Barbara said, hello? Hello, this is not in fact the ghost of Christmas past, it's Norman. I would never have guessed. How are you? What have you been doing? I never see you anymore. Yeah, well, I've been working pretty hard. As a matter of fact, I've been working like a madman. You see, I've got this thing due Monday, and I just turned in a paper today, she said. It's really good to have it done. Did I tell you about it? No, said Norman. He leaned back in his chair and kicked off his shoes. What was it about? Alienation in Shakespeare. Macbeth, the middle-aged Holden Caulfield. Crazy. Don't have to be so sarcastic all the time. I thought it was a good topic. Well, it probably is, but the whole idea just sort of underwhelms me. There you go again. I don't think you can say 2 damn sentences without, whoa, hold on, allow me to beg the hell out of your pardon, he said. No, really, I'm sorry. It's just that, work gets so, I don't know, so stupid. You know what I mean? No, she said, I just love my classes. But I guess I do know what you mean. I had this history course, and we just had so much reading, at least 100 pages every night. That's not what I mean, said Norma. I don't mind a lot of work. It's just all this numbers, graphs, monkeys, rats, reinforcement, conditioning shit that we got. Must you swear so much? Sorry. Once again, I beg the hell out of your pardon. But listen, do you see what I mean? Yes, she said, I guess so. I don't know. I just don't know. I mean, Norman, I think you ought to see a psychiatrist. And she said it fast, trying to sneak it in. What? Said Norman, laughing, running his free hand through his hair. I do. Norman being serious, very serious. So am I. Every Monday, 9 till 11:50. Dr. Bernard over in the psych department, and we play checkers. Are you serious? Really? Yes. How long have you been going? Since the start of the semester. Really? Checkers? That's a little unusual, isn't it? You said Norman. He's very progressive. I see. Sort of like play therapy, huh? Yeah, sort of. But listen, I didn't call to discuss my mental health. I just thought that if you weren't doing anything, we could get together later and have some coffee or something and talk. I mean, hell, I haven't seen you in so long. She said, sounding almost sad. I'd like to. I really would. And it's sweet of you to ask. But I can't. Norman had a rule, Barbara. Never ask why not. He broke it. Why not? Why not? What the hell do you mean, why not? I'm not deformed or anything or a nun. God, at least a month I haven't seen him. Then out of the blue, on a Saturday night at 7 o'clock, no less, he calls up and says, oh, Christ, if that's it, I mean, I've offended your God and pride by calling at the last minute. Well, may the good Lord slap Norman. I got a date. Why the hell did you just say so? If you'd just said Norman got a date, that would have been, I mean, hell, I was right. Crap. Well, what do you want me to do? Just told you. I said, all you gotta do is, I know, but you would have still been mad. Last time, said Norman, the big bullshit about your hair, you said you had to wash it up. Norman, will you please watch your language? Some nights I just can't seem to do anything right. I think you ought to get some rest tonight, Norman. You ought to just stay home, watch TV, and go to bed early. I really like you, Barbara, but I have to wash my hair. Norman, why do you say things like that? Why do you have to be this way? You used to be funny. I used to really enjoy talking to you. That was when you had dirty hair. See what I mean? Norman sighed. Yes, I guess you're right. In the future, I promise to do my best to do my duty to God and Scout Law. See, I can't help it. I just open my mouth, and Thor, the Samoan god of sarcasm, descends unto my larynx, and behold, he interjected his vile product, sarcasm. Yea, verily, and unto the 4th generation was it so. That moment, you're nuts. Yes, said Norman, I'm a victim of intro-punitive guilt and shallow affect. Is that what Dr. Bernard says? Dr. Barnyard says? Bernard, yes, that's all he ever says. Well, said Burke, I really have to fly. It's getting late, and I gotta get rest. Okay. Get some sleep, Norman. Okay. And keep in touch, you hear? Okay, said Norman, and he hung up. I should have told her, he thought. I should have told her what a bitch she is. I should have told her what a stupid, worthless turd she is, and the stupid, worthless things I do just because she's a goddamn woman. The ringing phone startled him. That's her, he thought. I'll tell her. Hello? Norm, this is Mike. What's shaking? Mike only called when he wanted something. Last time it had been Norm's economics no good. Mike was behind, but he just come over and look at Norman's, and he knew this would put on someday after all what it was for. Nothing much, Mike. How you been? Mellow, baby. Strictly mellow. Working my ass off, of course, but keeping my head above water, barely. You know how it is. Yeah, just that I've got this date tonight with your old girlfriend, and I thought, who? Said Norman, controlling his horse, but streaking slightly. Helen? No, man, that's lazy hair. No, you know, that blonde I used to see you with at the library all the time. Barbara. Yeah, Barbara. Anyhow, I was just wondering, you know, what does she like to do? I mean, the house is having this party tonight, and sometimes they get a little out of hand. Did you hear about last week? Man, Happy and TJ, they just got out of sight blasted. I mean, just bombed. The two of them finished a whole damn fifth of Southern Comfort. Anyhow, they were just so, I heard. Oh, so I sounded deprived. Anyhow, we're having another one tonight, and I wondered if maybe I shouldn't bring old, what's her name? Barbara. I mean, first date and everything, some chicks, she'll love it. Yeah, really? Christ, she had me fooled. No, why? She'll love it? Hey, listen, she doesn't, she's not, I mean, you know, I don't suppose, like a bunny. Carefully. Then, by the way, Mike, did you know that everything's better when you want it on it? You can't tell it from the 70-cent spread. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. That's Sean. Okay, man, I think you best be getting some sleep. I think you're going nuts. Anyhow, thanks for the info. I just Norman hung up. Ah, yes, he thought. I am going out of my mind. Yeah, I'm watching the kitchen. Lit a cigarette and turned on the radio. Johnny Cash was singing. Love's a burning thing. It makes a fiery ring. Pardon me, Mr. Cash, said Norman aloud. I'm from the American Opinion Poll, and I'm taking a survey. In your opinion, is Norman Hanson in or out of his mind? I fell into the burning ring of fire. I fell down, 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 and the flames, they rose higher. Norman tapped an ash onto the floor. Sing, Johnny, you got. Sing your head off.
Written years ago, but still relevant today. Well, I'm very pleased that three of David's wonderful colleagues and friends have joined us today. And together, these folks represent the uniqueness of David's career. Legal scholars, teachers, advocates for the public good, and of course, a judge and justice among them. So I'm going to introduce them in the order in which they sit in front of you. From the left, Garrett Epps, a nationally renowned constitutional scholar and a well-loved law professor both here at the University of Baltimore. Like David, Garrett is first and foremost a writer. He's authored both fiction and nonfiction books, and he's also an indefatigable court watcher. Many of you followed his 10 years or so on the Atlantic as the Supreme Court correspondent. Our second panelist is Kristen Granger, who worked with David in the Oregon Department of Justice when Harvey Myers was Attorney General. Ms. Granger has served the state of Oregon in several important capacities, including leading strategic communications for Governors Kate Brown and Ted Lugoski. And finally, on your far right is the Honorable Jack Landau, former Oregon Supreme Court Justice. Before he was elected to Oregon's highest court, Justice Landau was also a servant on the Oregon Court of Appeals with David. They were good friends there and thereafter. Justice Landau was known for his perceptive legal scholarship, and he was an important advisor to Sharon and a contributor to the book, The Voice for Justice. So I am not moderating you folks, and you are just going to take it away, Garrett.
Thanks, Margie. I think that the other panelists here will have some much more consequential things to say because David's career subsequent to being a law professor really achieved such tremendous as Deputy Attorney General, Judge of the Court of Appeals. He did a tremendous contribution, and he used to really take pleasure in talking about life and sale and with his colleagues there and so forth. I do have a couple of comments about David's earlier manifestation as a scholar, colleague. And for some reason, when I was asked to do this, the story came to my mind. I hadn't thought about it for years, but in my first semester, David and I had been talking about Civil Rights Act of 1964 and covered it. The next day, maybe even so, I just had this brainstorm. I walked into his office and I said, what if Ollie's Barbecue put up a sign that said, "We only concur dubitante with Katzenbach versus McClung"? Now, that will not mean much to most of you. David was kind enough to pretend that it meant something. And we had a discussion of whether concurring dubitante was a violation of the Civil Rights Act or came right up to the edge of First Amendment protected speech. And only later, when I became the extremely grouchy senior professor that you see in front of you, did it occur to me that there might have been something annoying to a senior member of the faculty, having the brand new untenured colleague burst through the door with a crazy hypothetical, one that included Latin. And David was very patient that way. And he always had something interesting to contribute to that kind of discussion, precisely because he was working at an angle to almost everybody else. He had his own commitments to civil liberties and to constitutional values that could not be characterized, in constitutional law today is as polarized as the rest of the country, and the polarization was already setting in. But David never actually followed the axes of polarization. That meant that he always had something worth listening to say about any idea. And I went back through some of his published scholarship. And, it reminded me that he considered himself a communitarian, which is a term that's used somewhat less often today, but, who had a commitment to the idea that local communities of people had a right to maintain certain values, and that much as, he was an ACLU civil rights lawyer, he also considered some things that the ACLU or a sort of knee-jerk progressive like myself might not. And I came across his article from 1984, which is called "The Political Community, the Individual and Control of Public School Curriculum." And it's really fascinating to try to think about how this plays out in 2022. Because he says that the local school board and its participation in the community are a model of democracy. That's where we can look for democratic values. That's where we can look for the values of discourse. And he said also that it should be structured so that local communities have most of the power of the state does not take it away and centralize all considerations, because the local community has the right to ask that students in their schools learn the local values. And I thought, well, that is an interesting perspective. I wonder, and this is sort of the point of this thing, as I wonder so often, what he would say today about this same question when we have seen the events of the past year and a half. And I came across this passage that, I thought really summarized in some ways what David brought to the table in a question like this and why it was so valuable. He was talking about the possibility that local control of schools might become oppressive. And he said the ultimate safeguard against this must be faith in the democratic process itself. Intolerance, small-mindedness, philistinism will always characterize a population in which the willingness and ability to participate in collective political action has atrophied beyond recognition, that is, an alienated population. The solution is to foster a citizenry of renewed commitment to the public good. We must assume that a truly enfranchised population, one in which political participation can mean more than passive observation of slick, slogan-full advertising campaigns, will not be alienated and will therefore in the long run make good decisions. This assumption is called democracy. It's a complicated definition of democracy, and I have to say that it strikes me as somewhat prescient, but I would give a huge amount to be able to sit down and talk to him about what is happening in school boards and anything else. He was the best colleague I've ever had. Treated me with great respect, except for one time that I took down his do not disturb sign and put up a big sign with a gigantic C written on it to notify people that he was taking a nap. He didn't like it. But everything else. Thank you. Is that what we're doing? Are we doing questions? Or what?
No, I think we need to keep going, but there will be time to mingle afterwards.
Thank you, Garrett. That was wonderful. I also saw David as a very cerebral human being, but I'd have to say that my interactions with David over the course of our time at the Department of Justice were more on a human level. He was, well, I have to rewind a little bit here. The Attorney General has the discretion, has his or her discretion to run their executive team how they see fit. And I worked for Hardy Myers, and Hardy selected David as his deputy. But the deputy is a statutory office that is required for every Attorney General, so that if in the event the Attorney General cannot serve or fulfill his duties or her duties, that person steps up. But in this instance, Hardy Myers divided the role of the Attorney General's deputy into two roles: an administrative associate Attorney General who primarily was in charge of the administrative duties of the Department of Justice and the newly formed attorneys union, and then the other public employees unions that were represented. There were, I think, 3 different unions in the department when he took office. So Leslie Bonney was his associate attorney general, and she was a labor lawyer, very talented, and became a very, I think, constructive and respected administrator within the department. But that left the lion's share of the legal work done by the Attorney General's office to David. And Hardy and David collaborated and consulted on everything. They had a door that adjoined their offices, and they would travel between, their doors to their offices could be closed, but that door could be open, and they would talk freely about a lot of things. And there were things that if David wasn't in the office, Hardy would want to wait until David was in the office so that he could talk through these kind of thorny matters. And the more David disagreed with him or took apart Hardy's arguments, the more Hardy liked it. So that was the climate, was this sort of team of rivals approach without, him actually being of a different political party or anything like that. So this is the kind of team he wanted to run and the kind of team he ran. And every day we met at 8:30 in the morning. So when I came on board, I was before Hardy had been sworn in, but he had been elected. And he gave me everybody's resumes and contact information to, as the person who was in charge of both the communications and the lobbying and advocacy, legislative relations for the Department of Justice. I was to put together the first team and announce the formation of the team to the public, which I did, through a press release, but it required me to read everybody's CV or a resume. And the minute you read David's, you're thinking, oh my God, I mean, what an overachiever, right? So I may have rolled my eyes. But I thought, this is somebody who's got a PhD in English literature, who's already published a number of things before he went on to become an attorney. And then he's continues to write short fiction and other poetry, other kinds of things, as he's also, solving all the legal conundrums and untangling these very difficult public policy issues. On behalf of, I might add, on behalf of the unheard, unvoiced person, the marginalized people, he is the advocate for the underdog always. And I thought, I'm not gonna like this person when I meet him. Because back in those days, I will say, often I was the only woman in the room and the youngest woman in the room in that back in those days. So I was used to being talked over and mansplained and generally marginalized or asked to get coffee, things like that. And I thought, here we go again. Here's another one of these guys. And of course, he's nothing like that. And he always looked me in the eye because frankly, I was a little taller than he was. And I think that his whole demeanor was one of curiosity about you as an individual and wanting to talk about stuff and even argue about stuff, but constructively. His goal was never to take somebody down or make them feel lesser than, but to make them feel empowered and get them to think about things. Learned a lot about the law from David. Without him telling me that I didn't know, I felt very comfortable going into his office and closing the door and going, okay, so can you please talk me through, whatever it is. And especially when we had a case from a court case come down that had been filed before I had come to the department, maybe before I graduated from high school, I don't know. But then the opinion comes out and it's for me to explain to reporters and to legislators what this means and how this, what solutions might be in place for policies to address the outcome of the case. And those kinds of things where David was great about doing that. The one thing Hardy did tell me was that David Schuman is a very idealistic human being. And so politics is going to frustrate him. And it did. And from the minute the great thing about our relationship was he was all substance and I was all process. So we talked through what the options were and I would explain them to legislators, and Hardy was saying, may want to keep David out of Capitol. And every once in a while, Peter Cogswell, my assistant, who had been in the department under Ted as well, would call me and say, David has left the building and no one knows where he's going. So he might be headed across the street. So, just be watching for him. I'd watch me just be casually walking. I was just going to get some coffee. That's all. I'm just getting coffee. Just don't talk to anybody. Because he had very clear ideals, and the legislature is the art of the possible. It's about consensus. And you don't often get the thing you envisioned the first round. Sometimes you don't get it the third round even, but change is incremental and it's based on what's possible at that time. And if you're somebody who sees the answer and sees the solution, you want to go there and say, why wouldn't we just do this? So he had some interactions across the street. Occasionally I'd ask the Solicitor General to come over instead, just because I think, she liked to talk a lot, but she wasn't instantly, giving people the impression that you're not getting it. I think his frustration was in the tension that is actually a productive tension between the partisan nature of the legislature. So them arguing over things or not going as far as you want to go when you know what the right thing to do is, it could be very frustrating for someone like David. So the other thing is that talking to reporters, he loved to talk to reporters, and it was another thing that Hardy would say, so maybe you could put a little space between David and maybe TV media, because again, he had a way of putting things that could be very pointed. And so I would get a newspaper article with it circled in red with Hardy's writing that says, David Schuman quoted again, tisk tisk. And so it was a running joke. And so David even would pick up on it and say, oh, there's an interview that's gonna happen today. But he didn't actually really want to go do that. I don't think he did anyway. The other thing that Hardy specifically put the person in my position, he specifically chose, he said, a non-lawyer, because he wanted the person talking to the media, talking to the legislators, not to be bound by the same kinds of constraints, and also, I think, to have plausible deniability in case I explained it wrong, or we had to rewind anything that I had said. And I don't, fortunately, I don't think we ever got to that point, but I do know the the point of having a non-attorney was that, you know, it gave more flexibility and also gave the department someone that's not bound by the same constraints. So, so we'd be in a meeting and someone would say blah, 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 and then Dave would say blah, 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 and I'd be listening, and they'd ask me a question, and Dave would say, you know, she's a non-lawyer. And so I took him aside and said, so David, yes, I'm a non-lawyer. I'm also not a farmer. I'm not a plumber. You know, I've got my own job. It's just that I don't have a legal credential. And he said, yes, Ms. Granger, there are many things you are not. Which is typical David Schuman style. You know, you don't sweat much for a fat girl. You long to get. He also had a huge heart and a great deal of warmth. He's unfailingly nice, and I don't mean in a phony way. I mean genuinely nice, and that's the kind of person that you have lasting friendships with. And I have a long-standing close relationship with David, and we're both really interested in music. My husband and I are both performing musicians, and David and Sharon came to a number of our shows. And David took up the banjo, and I finally found the one thing David wasn't perfect at. And it was the banjo. And of course you're asking yourselves, how could you tell? Because it's the banjo, right? But he was very shy about sharing his banjo playing. And I did hear him a few times, but he was so nervous about it. It was actually very charming for me to see and feel a little bit insecure. And the last anecdote I want to share about David is that he and Hardy both were acolytes, for lack of a better term, of Hans Linde. And they talked about him with huge respect and reverence. And I would refer to him just as Yoda, that he was Yoda. And finally, David responded once with, "It's constitutional, is not." I remember apparently his Hans Linde impression.
Actually scribbled down some notes for your benefit as much as mine, because when I start talking about my admiration for David, I tend to ramble. David was an extraordinary individual. He's a talented athlete. He's a gifted writer, an insightful scholar, and a distinguished jurist and a marvelous friend. I first met David some 25 years ago. He had just been appointed Deputy Attorney General, and it was a job that I had served in years before. And so we met for lunch to talk about the job, and we found that we shared a love of Italian food, of bluegrass music, admiration for Hans Linde and his contributions to state constitutional law. We served together on the Court of Appeals. We're actually on the same panel. We served together for many years. Actually, if you look at that picture, that little fuzzy stuff over there is me. That's my 15 seconds of fame. That was actually when I think it was when we were here at the University of Oregon hearing cases. Even after retirement, we continued to meet. We talked together many, many times, CLE programs, state constitutional law classes. I never failed to learn from David in the process. We would meet at the original Pancake House down the street. He would always order an omelet. It was a vegetable omelet, and for some strange reason or other, it baffled the servers that he would ask them to. It would be an egg white omelet, but he liked the cheese. It's a similar kind of thing. We'd go to lunch at the Capitol, and he would ask for the Southwestern chicken salad. Hold the chips, hold the chicken, hold the sauce on the side. In other words, a plate of lettuce. But that was just his thing. We would meet. We would swap stories about our advancing years, what David would call the organ recital, and swap pictures and argue about who had the most beautiful grandchild. My job is to talk a little bit about David as a jurist. To say that he was a distinguished judge doesn't do him justice. He authored some 672 opinions during his 13 years on the Court of Appeals. The opinions themselves were always timely submitted. They were elegantly written. They were usually short and to the point. I see his law clerks nodding. You know what I'm talking about. David was the consummate colleague. His door was always open, except for his daily nap after lunch. We went out to lunch once, and it was a rather large lunch, and I said, "No, I'm sorry, I can't order that because if I have that, I'm going to need a nap." And he said, "And your point?" Although a nationally recognized scholar, he never condescended to his colleagues. He always approached his work with humility and with good humor. His majority opinions were always just that. They're majority opinions. And I know sometimes majority opinions reflect the thinking of the court, and sometimes it's hard to suss out the personality or the thinking of the author of majority opinions. But I think if you look at David's majorities, you'll see at least two things of significance that I want to point out. The first thing is that David always followed the law. He always followed the law. Even if he didn't like it, he followed the law. That isn't to say he didn't occasionally kvetch about one rule or another that he found unsatisfactory, but he always found it. One of his very special pet peeves was the Oregon Supreme Court's case law about statutory interpretation, which required a very textual, what he would say is woodenly literal interpretation of the words of the statute. My favorite example of that is a case that we were on together in which we had to uphold a traffic stop for a defendant's failure to signal at least 100 feet of distance traveled before the stop sign, even though in that particular case, it was physically impossible for the defendant to have complied with that law. David read the statute as it was written, as he was required, but he couldn't help but add, and I quote, "If this were a jurisdiction where we could construe a statute so as to avoid the plainly absurd results of a literal interpretation that the legislature couldn't possibly have intended, that is, every other jurisdiction in the United States, the outcome of this case would be simple and straightforward. Not here, however." Second, there was David's deep commitment to state constitutional law. As a former clerk for and friend of Hans Linde, David was a steadfast proponent of the significance of state constitutional law. You have to understand, most states don't get this. In most states, the courts will interpret their state constitutions to mean whatever the United States Supreme Court says the parallel provision of the federal constitution means, notwithstanding the authority, according to the United States Supreme Court, the authority of the state courts to interpret their constitutional provisions more favorably to individual rights than the United States Constitution. David had a special loathing for federal equal protection analysis. He said that it entailed another wonderful quote, two-tiered scrutinies, three-pronged tests, four-factored analyses, sensitive balances, and sundry other exotica, currently occupying the Supreme Court's menagerie of 14th Amendment jurisprudence. He preferred the relative clarity of Oregon's privileges and immunities doctrine. He was a constant proponent of what is known as the first things first doctrine, which requires courts always to look at state constitutional law before even entertaining any claim of federal constitutional law claims. Sadly, it's a principle no longer taken so seriously by the Oregon courts. David's dissenting opinions show that although he was willing to follow precedent, he never lost an abiding concern for that those precedents must produce just results. A favorite example of mine is David's dissenting opinion in State versus Howard. The issue in that case was whether the police are required to obtain a warrant before they search the garbage that you put out in a can at the curb. A majority of the Court of Appeals sitting on Bonk concluded that a warrant was not required. David disagreed. The inquiry, he said, is this, and I have to quote it because it's so much David. If police officers or tax collectors or OSHA inspectors or safe investigators, without your knowledge and without cause to believe that you've done anything wrong, At your garbage collectors, give them your curbside containers after pickup. And then the officers took the container to their office, dumped the contents out on the floor, and went through them with a brutal fine-tooth comb. In the process, discovering your social security number, your bank account numbers, your credit account numbers, your diet, where you shop, what you buy, what medications you take, birth control pills, Viagra, Rogaine, Prozac, what cosmetics you use, what congenital diseases your DNA might disclose, what periodicals you read, what the discarded drafts of your reports of correspondence say, whom you telephone, how much alcohol you drink, whether or not you threw away that atrocious necktie Aunt Sally gave you for your birthday, and other details of your personal and professional life. In that situation, would you feel that your privacy has been violated? That is the question. And the answer can only be yes. Eloquent, pithy, and correct, as the Oregon Supreme Court would later conclude some years later in State versus Lynn. David was a remarkable judge. He set an example for all of us with his energy, with his intellect, with his compassion, and his wonderful humor. He is deeply missed.
Thank you so much to our panelists. That was wonderful hearing, not just about the professional life of David Schuman, but also all of those personal stories as well. I'm Rebecca Dinwiddie, and I am a co-director of the Wayne Morse Center for Law and Politics. And in addition to David Schuman's many contributions that we've heard about from the other speakers today, he was also a longtime volunteer at the Wayne Morse Center. He served on our advisory board, and he also served every year helping us select our Wayne Morse Law Fellows. And those are outstanding U of O students who are determined to spend their life and their work and career working in the public interest. And during those selection interviews, a lot of folks were intimidated by having a judge in on the interview. And David could start out looking fairly serious. But if we asked a question about grades, and a particular student might blanch a little because they might have had a grade that they didn't consider, was less than satisfactory, David would share that he had a sweet spot in his heart for students who maybe had less than stellar grades because he had earned a C in contracts and had, despite that, gone on to lead a pretty decent career in the law. So he was wonderful at setting students at ease. And when we needed some help from a student to gather the writings of David Schuman, the Wayne Morse Center kind of created a law fellowship to help do the research and editing, to help Sharon and others in this room do that monumental task. There was a lot of competition to get that law fellowship, not just because it involved a stipend, but because so many students had been positively affected by David Schuman. They considered him a mentor, and they considered it that it would be an honor to be able to put that information together and share it with the wider community. So really his role in students' lives, and I also know in his clerks' lives, was really important. In terms of our law fellowships, again, these are students who want to work in the public interest. And so what the Wayne Morse Center does is we provide a summer stipend for students to work. Generally, it's on Capitol Hill or for an Oregon State agency or for some sort of legal advocacy group. We also do mentorship. Students are invited to events and trainings with public intellectuals, judges, state leaders, and they become part of a broad network of alums throughout the country who are happy to offer tips on clerkships and where to live when you move to Seattle or DC or New York. So when Sharon was, had conceived of this idea of gathering and collecting and publishing David's writings, she saw as part of that greater effort, she wanted to create a fellowship at the Wayne Morse Center in David's name. And that fellowship would concentrate on sending students not to DC or to Salem necessarily, but to work in an organization that really fights for the most vulnerable Oregonians, because she felt that that is what David would have wanted. And so thanks to really a tremendous effort of fundraising from Sharon, from Margie, from Wayne Morse Center founder Margaret Hallett, and due to the generosity of a lot of folks in this room and joining us via Zoom and the Wayne Morse Center team, we were able to raise enough money to do a soft launch of the David Schuman Legal Justice Fellowship in 2021. And Sharon helped us select our inaugural David Schuman Legal Justice Fellow, Mandy Dormant, who I'm going to introduce in a moment. And also due to the generosity of a lot of people in this room and online, we are really excited that we also are able to fund 2 David Schuman fellowships this summer. And we have our incoming fellows with us, Bailey Boatsman and Vina Alexander, giveaway there. And we are so excited. Also to the professors who let us know these are the students who would be outstanding David Schuman fellows, and they have to go through a rigorous interview process, but it's really nice to know that professors are on the lookout for students who they think would fill this role really well. Mandy, I'll ask you to come up in a moment to share some of your experience with us from this summer. But I just want to say that Mandy is an outstanding U of O law student. She serves as a legal research and writing tutor and also is an assistant to Professor Kristen Bell, researching problems with the treatment of incarcerated people, predominantly in Oregon, but maybe also nationally. Mandy has a bigger brain than I for sure, because she earned a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics at Linfield College and is already a published author, like David was by the time he got into law school, writing research articles. She then went on to earn a master's degree in criminal and intelligence analysis at the University of Central Oklahoma, and then worked professionally with justice-involved individuals, both pre-trial and in the courtroom. So she brought a lot of experience with her to law school and to the Schuman Fellowship. So Mandy, why don't you come on up?
Me, and I have some notes in front of me because I always get a little blank when I'm in front of this many people, and I want to make sure that I say what I want to say. So thanks to the David Schuman Legal Justice Fellowship, and like Rebecca said, the generosity of many of the people in this room and joining us virtually. I spent the summer after my 1L year interning for the Oregon Justice Resource Center's Civil Rights Project, fighting for the rights of those who often go unheard, the society cast behind walls, out of sight and out of mind. I'd like to share with you a few of the projects that touched me most. During my time there, the team focused on multiple lawsuits protecting the rights of adults in custody, the most significant of which has already led to injunctive relief providing priority access to vaccines for all adults in custody in Oregon during the COVID-19 pandemic. I was also lucky enough to support OJRC's efforts in seeking justice for protesters who experienced police brutality at the hands of the Portland police during the summer and fall of 2020. And finally, I was able to assist the team in their compassionate advocacy for the unhoused community in Portland whose property was at risk during never-ending sweeps of their dwellings. I'm so grateful for the opportunity this fellowship provided me. Like Rebecca said, I was lucky enough to come into law school with a lot of experience opposing some of the abuses of the justice system. And my experience with OJRC and the David Schuman Legal Justice Fellowship has only furthered my conviction that this work is vitally important to the health and welfare of our society, and has only fueled my desire even more to take part in building a more equitable system. This type of hands-on work with a legal advocacy organization is too often financially inaccessible for students that don't have the resources. Instead of risking my own financial well-being to help others in desperate need of legal services, I'm one of the lucky few who was afforded the opportunity to follow my heart and passion without accepting that burden. I'm incredibly grateful to be part of David Schuman's legacy and his dedication to public service.
Thank you so much. I understand from Rebecca that the Resource Center was so delighted with your work. We're very happy to have Bailey and Vina come next. So it's a wonderful start that you've given us. So the Schuman Fellowship itself has had a wonderful start, not just with these great people, but also with the fundraising that some of you participated in. And of course, through Sharon's generosity, as Rebecca tells us, we've been able to fund you, Mandy, and the upcoming fellows. But our dream is to have enough that we can have a permanent foundation for this fellowship. That means we can fund students in perpetuity. So Rebecca, Sharon, and Margaret Howard and I have a goal in mind that we want to hit. So I'm making a pitch to you today. I'm asking you to make as large a donation as you possibly can. And obviously, we all have different circumstances, and some of you are students, and we understand that, of course. But if you are a person who is looking for a number in your mind, what can I give to the David Schuman Legal Justice Fellowship? I just ask you to think as big as you can, and I'll give you a number right now of $250 if you can do that. Of course, we will welcome a penny if that's what you can do. Sharon has donated a number of books to us today that will be available to anybody who will $200 or more. And Sharon will be over there with the books later after our program. And we want to tell you, just to make it easy on you, there are a number of ways that you can contribute to this wonderful fellowship. Obviously, you can always write a check. You can take good old American cash. You can put, if you would make the check payable to the Morse Center, Wayne Morse Center for Law and Politics, and you would put in the subject line Schuman Fund, and we'll figure it out. There is an address, a website on the whiteboard. I wrote it twice because the first time I wrote it too small, but it's the same thing. It's https://duckfunder.uorg.edu. That's the centralized U of O funding site, and then /project 25538. And that'll make it easy on you. And of course, if you have a credit card today, you want to give us a credit card, Rebecca will facilitate that transaction. And as you've seen, this gift will do a number of things. It allows students like Mandy and Bailey and Vina to have full-time paid summer jobs, which is so essential for them, to do work for the public good. That's the students that we're looking for. So people who want to donate or dedicate their careers to the public good, as David did. And obviously they're giving their time to organizations who can't pay for them. That these are nonprofit organizations typically, and they can't afford to hire students. So we're kind of getting two good things there. We're also giving students tools and experiences that will help them develop their careers as voices for justice. We're connecting them with mentors, with UL Law alums, with community leaders who serve in the public interest. So I suspect that all of you struggle, as I do, to find ways to participate in this fractious world in a way that feels good. And I just want to leave you with the note that this is what I leave this room feeling good about what we did today. So thank you everyone for coming.
Margie,
Yeah, please, come on up.
I'll do it from here.
All right,
This is the question,
all right.
right? So the question is, what is the fundraising goal? And I ask this because I know that for some people, $250 will be a stretch. And for others, it's not.
Right.
It's an extra thing at Starbucks, right? So, over the course of, a year. So, to get a sense, because I don't want you to limit those that would want to give and make
make sure that this fellowship exists in perpetuity. So 250 just seemed like a low number.
I love you. I can see why you're very successful. So the goal is $150,000. And that's what we need to put in a fund that's gonna pay out the dollars that we'll use to fund the students. So thank you for asking that question. Maybe there's somebody in the room that wants to write a check for $150,000.
Because that's only like 5 trips to Starbucks.
In perpetuity.
Thanks, Dean Burke. Yeah. So, so please do stay around and chat. I think all of us would enjoy the opportunity to share thoughts. Rebecca, is there anything that you want to wind up with?
That's it. I'll just be over there with Sharon with the books, and we invite people to stay and,